What's up? It's the Monster Man here. Today, I'm back with another video. Today, I want to talk about how I think DC is kind of ruining Aqualad, and I hope that they can refocus or recommit to this character. Recently, I finished reading Aquaman, The Becoming, and Aquaman, and I've been stewing on Aqualad's depictions in these books, and I think there's a lot of issues with how they write this character and his stories that I just wanted to go over today. First, let's clear up a few things in this discussion. I understand that Aqualad has been past the middle of Aquaman in both of these books, but the original Aquaman is present in both titles. For the sake of being clear on who I am discussing, I will refer to Jackson Hyde as Aqualad for the duration of this video, if I'm not referring to him directly as Jackson. Second, these comics are not the worst comics I've ever read, and I'm glad they exist for the sake of representation. But the representation is a little weird in this, and I will get to that. But just to be clear, I like new original black superheroes, and Aqualad is one of the best new ideas in the past couple years. And frankly, I think his hydrokinesis makes him a much cooler Aquaman, and I do want to see this character get more stories. But the writing does need to be improved. Some of my criticisms may seem a little nitpicky, but when you take all the little nitpicks as a whole, I think you start to see that it becomes a bigger problem for the series as a whole. And Aquaman The Becoming is, I believe, technically Aqualad's first solo outing where he wasn't part of a team book. That was actually an ongoing series and not just throwaway single issue. So I wish a little bit more had been done to make sure the character was elevated in his story. And I think that's something I want to touch on too, is, for lack of a better phrase, is what the responsibility of a solo title is to bring in new readers and explain the character. And on that note, I do think Aquaman The Becoming does do a lot to help build Aqualad's lore, so I appreciate it for giving the character some original problems to work through. But I think it could have done a better job of establishing the character's history before this solo title a bit more for people who are checking out just this book for the first time. And I'll elaborate as I go on. Oh, and one more thing. Again, some of this stuff may come off as harsh to the author, but my intention is to be constructive and not diminutive to whoever wrote this. I just want that to be clear off the bat. So, Aquaman The Becoming opens with Aqualad training with Aquaman in a simulation against Darkseid's army. Now, I do think this is a strong opening for a story where he is supposed to take on the Aquaman mantle, showing what kind of threat an Aquaman is expected to be able to face. You know, for as much as Aquaman gets joked on, he is a Justice League member who takes on huge threats like Darkseid. So I think establishing training for that kind of threat does make sense. And I kind of wish the threat he faced in this book would have been of a similar caliber, and I don't think anyone can deny that it simply is not. And there will be spoilers for this book for the sake of discussion, by the way. And as much as I like this premise, right off the bat, I do kind of have problems with this depiction. So, one thing that seems pretty apparent throughout this whole volume of issues is that Aqualad seems very different from how we've seen this character before, and I'm not just talking about the hairstyle change. So let's start with the visuals first. Aqualad in the comics is named Jackson Hyde, and he's based off of the character Calderon from the TV show Young Justice. I think technically he made his debut in the comic Brightest Day #4, a couple months before his appearance in Young Justice, but Young Justice is what truly popularized the character, and the character was not fleshed out at that point as much as his Young Justice counterpart. And the version that debuted in Teen Titans is much closer to the depiction of the Young Justice version than the one that shows up in Aquaman The Becoming, with low-cut hair being bleach blonde and keeping his tall and imposing figure that he held in Young Justice. In Aquaman, you'll notice his features are very different. He loses a lot of the roundness in his face compared to how he's depicted in Titans. You could try to chalk it up to art style, but it is a noticeable change, especially when you consider the rounded face aesthetic feels like it pulled right from Young Justice. So moving away from that creates a bit more of a dissonance between me and this new design. And one thing that stood out to me was in his first appearance in Titans, he's very deliberately more muscular on the top than he is in the legs. He has kind of that Dorito hero body, for lack of a better term. And to me, that was a very distinct look. So seeing this very slimmed down, very normal proportion for the character did kind of throw me off in Aquaman The Becoming. Even in the Titans show, he doesn't have such traditional proportions. He comes off as a bit lankier. So seeing the perfect proportions in this comic kind of threw me off, but of course it's a stylistic choice. You could debate all day whether or not he's supposed to be buffer or not. And again, whether or not that's gonna throw other readers off is debatable. But of course, yeah, they made the choice to keep him in the exact same suit he was wearing in Titans. So these other changes were more pronounced to me. Maybe if they had like updated the suit or given him something slightly different that was still recognizable, I might not have noticed the proportion change as much, but just because he is in the exact same suit, I did. The other thing too is the hair. I do want to talk about. Now, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that Jackson Hyde, being a character whose origins were about the counterculture and embracing that, I could definitely see him being a character who would grow out the lock. And there's nothing inherently wrong about the locks, but one thing that does bother me as a black man is you can't go from a shaved head to locks overnight. That kind of change would take a long amount of time, probably a year or two of growing your hair out and doing different things to it. And I kind of wish there were some issues that had kind of an in-between style, and maybe they are, but I couldn't find it with a quick Google search. So just going from shaved head to full head of hair with locks was kind of jarring to me, especially because he does still show that he has those ties to the Titans, and most of the other Titans don't look as changed as he does. It's especially kind of weird in a medium like comics where characters are really resistant to any kind of change that they'd, make this choice to give him the locks. Maybe they thought it was a change that made him look more, contemporary for the times. It's definitely just a popular hairstyle right now with the time this book was written, so I could see that. But again, a weird choice. It just creates some distance for me to the character because it's so different. But yeah, other than that, like I said, he's spot on in terms of the costume. It's literally the exact same as the one from Titans. So I guess that's my only visual gripe. The next thing I want to kind of talk about though is the personality. And this ties in the visual in a sense, especially the way they do his facial expressions here compared to how they were done in Titans. It's just very different, and I don't really think you can deny that when I put, different expressions on the screen from the old series to this one. Aqualad in this series to me has a pretty drastically different personality from his original debut. Again, Jackson Hyde when he first came out was already very mature, collected, very motivated to fit in with the group. And this Jackson just comes off as a little bit different. Like even in the next few pages of Aquaman Becoming's first issue, you see him flirting with this guy and getting a little flustered from talking to a cute guy. And again, this is gonna sound like a nitpick, but it's just a little weird that he'd have this reaction. Aqualad is openly gay in the comic and in the original Titans show, and in his first debut in Rebirth, he'd already been in a significant relationship for some time, and again was confident in himself. And his mother also knows that he's gay and has known for forever. So getting so flustered around just a cute guy, coming around doing his job, it seems a little bit out of character, a little strange that he would even have this reaction. And there are even more issues with this interaction, mostly being that this little meet cute doesn't really end up going anywhere. As you will see later in this volume, they kind of introduce this character and then realize, oh, Aqualad's supposed to be with Hawei. We should push that and push this character off to the side. And that's kind of it. And that's something I've noticed these two volumes do a lot, is introduce characters and then push them off to the side without really giving you anything. And if that was going to be the case, I don't think they really need to be having these characters in the story. It's a little strange. And we're going to point to more instances here in a bit. The real story kicks off when Jackson re-enters his little training room and he's ambushed by an armored Atlantean soldier that we've never seen before, who puts a beating on Aqualad pretty easily and then blows up a major building in Atlantis, framing Aqualad for the crime. Now this is where I want to talk about kind of the main plot for this section, and basically it's a thinly veiled allegory for racism, as Aqualad is from Zebel. I think that's how you pronounce it, Xebel. I'm gonna call it Zebel. If I pronounce it wrong, let me know in the comments. I don't really care. For the sake of the story, I'm just gonna call it Zebel, because that's how I read it in my head. And there's nothing inherently wrong with doing a story that's an allegory for race issues when you have a black character, but the whole Zebel-Atlantean conflict is really difficult to kind of wrap your head around when you consider that when Aquaman is married to someone from Zebel and was literally the queen at one point, and it being well known that Aquaman supports Aqualad. So you really have to jump through a lot of hoops to even believe that these soldiers would truly believe that Aqualad is the person who's responsible for this terrorist act when he's so close to the royal family to begin with, and the royal family themselves have ties to Zebel. The fantasy really breaks down when you start seeing things like that. It also creates a lot of issues when you have a lot of the villains being black, yet one of the most well-known people from Zebel being a white royal living in luxury. It's kind of off-putting, and again, it's not like it's impossible to tell this story, but I think you have to be more careful with it when you have a circumstance like that and you make it so obvious that this is related to race. But yeah, basically, quick summary, Jackson is framed for an explosion, and he has to go on the run to try to figure out what's going on. He gets injured, has to heal himself using Titan's tech, while Mira has to go off and protect all of the Zebellians that are out there and put them off of Jackson's trail so that he can figure out who the actual terrorists are and stop the plot, basically. And there's a moment here with Hallway that I also wanted to touch on. And again, don't know how to pronounce his name, so let me mispronounce it if I'm doing it wrong, and leave me some phonetics in the comments again. It's clear that Hallway looks visually similar to Wind from Young Justice. He has a similar widow's peak and the long flowing hair, so it seems likely that people coming from that series would expect Jackson to end up with this character, but the author doesn't seem to be that interested in developing this character, and I'm not quite happy with the visual change either. And to be clear, I'm not just talking about his weight, though that is an interesting choice, but seeing as I'm not certain if this character is somebody in another political station, I guess that's not a huge issue. I'm more commenting on the fact that he has the classic fish scales in a leotard type suit, which has been out of style for quite a long time, and I think he's the only character we see in this singlet type outfit that, of course, is not very flattering to his body type. But that's more a matter of opinion. I'll just say if they wanted to do a bigger character, I think there are better designs that they could have gone for, like the streamlined look of Bouncing Boy or the imposing look of the Kingpin. There's a way to do heavy characters and not make them unflattering, is all I'm saying. The exact nature of Hallway and Aqualad's relationship isn't incredibly clear in these books, and there aren't a lot of author notes that point you to previous interactions that would give you more context to how their relationship is developing. You can see here that Hallway is concerned about Jackson, and you can circle around in your mind enough that they were friends, but Jackson was clearly flirting with other guys in this run, so they aren't together yet, and you'll see in this run that they barely interact. Like here they are having a phone call that isn't particularly romantic in the slightest, and they only have one or two more interactions before they're a couple in Aquaman, and the progression of the relationship just is not there, and it's hard to even fill it in with gaps of, oh, this happened off screen, when Aquaman essentially takes place directly after this issue, and I'll point to that time frame here in a moment. I think it's like literally a couple weeks because his mom is still injured in Aquaman, so they don't have a lot of time to cultivate this relationship that they're trying to build up here. I just think it's handled extremely poorly, and I think that's kind of part of what I mean for the bad representation in this comic. It makes Aqualad look kind of wishy-washy and as if he'll return feelings for anyone who is slightly interested in him. And again, there could be more to this relationship, some building blocks that were in other issues, but I don't exactly know where to look, and that's what author notes should be doing for me, and they don't have a lot of those in this issue, and they would be useful in a solo issue. Maybe have Hallway reference an event that they had together and put a note in there. I think that's a problem a lot of authors have in media nowadays, and not just in comics, but also in TV as well, where they wrongly make assumptions that their audience has followed every little thing before their work. And I'll just tell you as a consumer, that is rarely the case. You see it in things like the last Doctor Strange movie, where they assume you've seen WandaVision to have the full context, which is a weird assumption given that it's on a paid subscription service. Why would fans of the older Doctor Strange movies necessarily think they need to watch a show about an unrelated character? And I'll leave that there. I just wanted to make the point that, again, this is Aqualad's first solo series, and there's just not a lot of context for these relationship buildups. And I think a solo series has a bit more of a responsibility than, say, a team book to make sure you know all that previous history, or at least point you to it. So, basically, after a little bit more investigating, Aqualad comes into confrontation with the armored soldier from the previous issues. I do think Aqualad is a bit more on model here, so I do want to point that out. Seems a little bit broader, face seems a little bit more correct, but it's still different. After fighting this soldier for a little bit, his mother comes in to help him, and they basically realize that the soldier is Jackson Hyde's sister, and she is the terrorist that started all of this. Now, I will commend this book. I do think this bit of lore with this hidden sister is kind of interesting, and definitely something I think they should build on a bit more. Essentially, you find out that Zebel has a bit of a conscription service where their kids are taken and turned into soldiers from a young age, and that's what happened to his sister here. And it's kind of implied here that that whole event estranged his mother and his sister's relationship pretty much from the start, and I think that's a decent explanation on why she wouldn't have been brought up previously. I wouldn't say they were particularly really close simply because of this whole conscription event that happened. And they don't go into it too deeply, but I'm sure that has something to do with why she may have left and didn't want to lose Jackson to the same fate as her previous daughter. And we also found out that she had a husband before Black Manta, which I thought was pretty interesting and definitely something they could explore a bit more what that relationship was like. And this is another nitpick I have, because this is another one of those situations where there's a bit of contrived drama here, where Jackson's sister believes her mother wasn't around even for the death of her husband. When she was, she just had to be in hiding. She could have easily told her daughter this in like one sentence, but refuses to for literally just the sake of the plot. I'm not a big fan of writing like that. If it's something very simple and your kid is now an adult, there's not really a reason to keep hiding that, so explaining it in one sentence would not be difficult. And it wouldn't totally eliminate the drama. You could spin that off into something more interesting, like, oh, what was your purpose in hiding that, and, you know, creating a fallout from that. It's just too convenient for my take. From there, we get another bit of an action scene where his mother and Aqualad gets captured. And I have another nitpick here on basically Aqualad's mom. It was established in Teen Titans that Aqualad's mom also has hydrokinetic powers, yet she never really uses them, which seems like an odd choice. And it makes me wonder, along with a couple other things, if the author was really caught up with the Atlantean lore. Because given that they have this warrior society, surely she would opt to use her hydrokinetic powers, at least somewhat. I know their weapons may be more effective, and maybe that's her reasoning, but come on now. You're not going to use hydrokinesis at all when your son is using it all the time. From there, they basically get captured and discuss the political conflict with Zebel, with the entire family, because of course everyone involved in this coup attempt is somehow related to Aqualad, and I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but still a little weird that all the biggest players happen to be part of Aqualad's family. And after getting all that information, Aqualad basically steps out, says he doesn't want any part of that. And the next issue has him and his sister working together, showing that they are on good terms. And I also wanted to point out another plot issue that makes me wonder how read up this person is on the lore, because it's just a little strange. You get a statement from Delilah, Aqualad's sister, that nobody has powers like Jackson in Zebel, which literally should be untrue. There should be multiple people in Zebel with his powers, because we find out that they are genetic to begin with. So why would other people not have the same genes as him in Zebel? Doesn't make a lot of sense. Mira has the powers. She's from Zebel. And again, like Tynes established, his mother also has those same powers, even though she is, for whatever reason, not using them in this storyline. And again, I think I should reiterate, the universe wasn't rebooted since this happened. I think technically this coincides with maybe the Infinite Frontier initiative, but basically that made everything canon, so that also would not help the situation, and it wasn't technically a reboot. So yeah, there are just kind of plot holes with that statement. And again, it's a minor thing that could technically be true. Jackson's not from Zebel, his mother never mentioned other people with the powers, but you'd have to admit it'd be weird for that to be true. There would be questions, like, there were definitely people with those powers before, so what happened to them? Are they just that rare that they all die out? But I don't think we're supposed to be asking all those questions. I think they want us to take that at face value, that there's just not people like Aqualad around, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And in this issue, we get another interaction with Hallway, which is, again, only a 2-page interaction and very surface level, and they don't discuss a whole lot other than Jackson catching Hallway up on what we as the reader already know has happened, because he's in the middle of a lot of stuff and they don't really have time for this emotional moment, to be honest. And one of my biggest problems here is that I think this is literally one of the moments that is supposed to lead to the relationship. One of the only moments. I don't think there's a lot more context that I'm missing from what I can tell. And if so, this is terrible. This is the most surface level thing. This isn't really a emotional conversation, to be honest. If they're going to push this relationship, they should build it up a bit more interactions with Hallway, have him be more involved instead of just coming in from the side later. It seems like they're using him more like a prop for the fan service, for the people who want to see this relationship come into being, rather than actually making a compelling story around how they get together. I know people may bring up, Young Justice didn't give that relationship a lot of screen time, but again, Young Justice is a team-based show. It's a little bit more forgivable, and not every character in Young Justice is on screen at the same time, so you can do a lot of this legwork in your head and give them a lot of benefit of the doubt. When you don't really get that in a solo series that's supposed to be focused on the character, the legwork should be done on the panel, because there's really not anything else going on. It's their series, we should see what they're getting up to. This brings us to the last issue of Aquaman The Becoming, where they basically pull a raid against the terrorist group that is causing all this, and they find out who is ultimately behind everything, and boy, Does this issue make me a little angry? Let me just get into it. Basically, we get some cool action scenes of Aqualad and his sister fighting through all these terrorists, and actually, we may see his mom using her water powers here, but it's really unclear. She has kind of these energy swords that probably are her using her hydrokinesis, but why are they red? It's kind of weird. Mira and Jackson never have different color energy when using their hydrokinesis, so that's makes me wonder if that is just the weapon, if it's some kind of just energy weapon, or if she does it. You know, I shouldn't have to ask all these questions. It should be more obvious what's going on. But one thing I do want to point out that I do think is cool is the idea that Aqualad has gotten a power up at this point, because now he can make solid constructs that are bigger and more solid without needing a conduit like his hilts. So now he can make, you know, a solid trident to fight with when he couldn't before. And that's pretty cool. But yeah, ultimately, we find out that the real culprit, the one behind everything, is Mika, who is a Zebellian, who is martyring other Zebellians for her cause, basically trying to instigate a war. And does anyone see the problem with this? It's black on black crime. Oh no. The Atlanteans weren't racist the whole time. It was Zebels doing it to themselves. They're the means of their own destruction. Yeah, this is bullshit. This is not good writing. And yeah, this is a problem, and does kind of taint Aqualad's storytelling a little bit. I don't like this. And again, this is fiction, but it's clear what the message was supposed to be. Future Monster Man here, and I do feel like I need to elaborate on that point a little bit more. Black on black crime is a politically charged topic, which came about during the period of Black Lives Matter and defund the police, and was used a lot by political parties and news outlets during that movement to kind of point out that a lot of crime in the black community is done against themselves, and maybe we need to target our own communities before we target everyone else. And whether or not you believe there's merit to that point is kind of beside the point, because politically, this tactic is used as a diversion to the actual issues at hand. Even though you may have merit in the black on black crime statement, it's not related to the issues that were being discussed at the time, and that parallels in this book as to being unrelated to the issues in this book. For example, protests were about police brutality. The fact that a majority of crime for black people is done against black people has nothing to do with how the police interact with the black community. I also want to take a moment to point out that a majority of crimes against people of any race are done by their same race, and you can look at the 2019 victimization report to see that, and that's relevant because 2019 is when this term was kind of coined and used the most. In that report, you'll see that 62% of violence incidents against white victims were done by white victims, and 70% of black incidents committed against black victims were also done by black victims. So you could see a majority of all crime are done by people of the same race, so bringing this up as a black or white issue is irrelevant. Now back to what I was saying about this comic book. This comic tried to highlight that there are still tensions between Atlantis and Zebel, and you could see in the one interaction with Mira, where she was being profiled by the police while taking care of her child, displaying that there are still racial issues in Atlantis, is undermined by the fact that a Zebellian is the true culprit of the crime. This in turn serves to justify the Atlantean police's behavior, even though during that investigation the cops were wrong and the video was doctored exactly like Mira suggested. And this racism is not brought up in the sequel series Aquaman either, and I plan to go over Aquaman in a part 2 to this video. So it seems with this villain reveal, the author wants you to forget about the real problems, similar to how politicians use the black on black crime statement during that time, and that's the parallel I'm trying to make here. Now, back to my previous recording. And of course, with the help of Mira, they managed to beat the terrorist and free everyone, but not before his mother gets gravely injured by a random soldier who Aqualad beats to death, or nearly beats to death. It was never made clear, but he probably killed him. It looks pretty brutal to me. This moment gives a lot of, what's that term about women in refrigerators? Injuring somebody just for the sake of the plot. It felt like this was kind of unnecessary for his mother to be hurt by this grunt, to the point of basically almost dying. She's been put in a coma, and this moment was supposed to show the darker side of Aqualad, even though I don't think this actually accomplishes that. Like, the art tells you that they want you to invoke Black Manta, and like, oh, he has some evil in him because he's beating this man to death. This is the correct response. This is the correct response to a stranger nearly killing your mother. If you don't put hands on them, there's something wrong with you. Like, so trying to invoke that this is in any way not heroic or a dark thing to do, I don't know. I'm just, I don't know. And Aquaman is a lot like, you know, the Amazons in a lot of ways, which I'm going to bring up in a bit. They don't have no killing rules. Like, nobody would look negatively on Aqualad in this situation, and people don't look negatively on him for this situation. So it's weird to try to make these subtle comparison here when I don't really think it's apt. But hey, that's the end of this issue, for the most part. And in conclusion, you might notice that hardly anything was resolved in this book. Only the initial explosion was addressed. The underlying problems with the Zebellian conscription, the racial issues with Atlantis, none of this is addressed, and no one is punished. And I think that's ultimately the failure of this book. And before anyone brings up the direct sequel, the sequel also does not address any of these issues. That's just unfortunate. So in the future, I really hope Aqualad gets his due, or even if the same writer wants to wrap up these kind of loose plot threads he's been putting into the book, it would be appreciated, and I think it'd help the character get more prominence and respect he deserves. But yeah, that's the end of this video for me. If you enjoyed the topic, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. But otherwise, I just appreciate anyone who stuck around to listen to me ramble. Sound off in the comments, because I'm looking for more things to rant about, to be honest. These comics got me a bit miffed. But again, thank you. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day.